And everybody? Okay, this is the, we got everybody? This is the third committee briefing, third of three, thankfully, on hot topics facing the committee, especially regarding the environment. This is an exciting time to be in county government because there's so many big discussions and plans happening around our ambitious the climate emergency we declared, how to reach the ambitious goals set out in that resolution and our climate mobilization report. We know how hard it will be to get there, but the good news is we have a great team at the table to lead us there. So, welcome everybody. I'm very happy to have ACAO Adriana Hochberg in front of us for the first time, right? Yes. Excellent. So welcome. And then why don't you introduce yourself and your team, and then we'll get started.
Oh, thank you very much. Good afternoon, council members. I'm very pleased to be here before you with a team of county department directors and staff. We have Director of DGS, David Dice. Fortunately, Department of Environmental Protection Director Adam Ortiz could not be here with us, but he's very ably substituted by Sam Edwards of his staff. To my right, we have Director Al Roshdi of the Department of Transportation, Department of Permitting Services Director Diane Jones, and her staff, Mark Newman. And this is going to be a team presentation today. We all contributed to the slides, and we're all working together to combat climate change.
Terrific. So we'll let you go through your slides and your presentation, see what questions and comments my colleagues have, and then we want to reserve a couple minutes each for some of our advocates from Sierra Club and 350.org that have been advising us on how to get to our goals as well. So with that, take it away. Thank you.
Okay. So I've been on the job for exactly 1 month and 1 day, so I'm still using my newbie card here. Very grateful for this opportunity to serve Montgomery County in the role of ACAO. And in this role, I wear a number of different hats, but I think perhaps the biggest hat is serving as the climate coordinator for the county. And sometimes I've also been called the climate czarina, which has a nice ring to it. I see my role as a band conductor, and by that I mean that I'm trying to keep everybody synchronized and working towards the same end goal of curbing carbon emissions. I'm still very much in the assessment stage. I have been meeting internally with getting to know the county department leadership and their staff, as well as our community. And that is very much still in process, and I've been learning a lot already. And so with that, I'd like to, there are 4 agenda items that we're going to be going over this afternoon. First, we're going to be going through our greenhouse gas inventory data. Second, we're going to be talking about current actions and opportunities for buildings, energy supply, and transportation. We'll be talking about our thinking on with regards to climate planning and coordination. And I'll close with some I call them micro actions that each of us can take at the personal level to combat climate change. But before I dive in, I do want to share some of my early takeaways from my ongoing assessment. I think that there's a lot of good work taking place, and we have some really good people here on the staff, as well as some foundational programs that are going to serve us well as we move forward. However, I think it's safe to say that we're not doing enough, and we're currently not on track to meet the county's ambitious climate goals. And so we're going to need to move forward faster and focus on policies and investments that are really scaled up and prioritize the work that has the greatest impact on curbing greenhouse gas emissions. And most importantly, we're going to need the entire community to get involved on this cause, including the private sector, so that we can turn the curve on carbon emissions. So where are we with regards to emissions? Well, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, or COG, conducts the greenhouse gas emissions inventory for our county. And they have done it at 3 points in time, 2005, 2012, and 2015. And the good news is that between 2005 and 2015, we have seen a reduction of 14% in greenhouse gas emissions in the county. And that's primarily due to the greening of the electric grid. So that's a region wide result, not something that's specific to Montgomery County. But as you can see on that graph, between 2012 and 2015, there was actually a 3% increase in greenhouse gas emissions in our county. And that was primarily due to colder weather, population growth, and increased energy use per household and per square footage. Just yesterday, a couple of us had an opportunity to meet with Google, and they're doing something exciting. They're piloting their own greenhouse gas inventory for jurisdictions for free. And so that's something that we'll be exploring further to see to what extent we can get access to their data to supplement these few data points that we have here. COG is in the process of conducting their next greenhouse gas inventory for the county. That's going to look at 2018 emissions, but that information is not going to be available to us until the end of next year. For Montgomery County, the three biggest slices or sectors of emissions are residential buildings, commercial buildings, and transportation, and together they take up 92% of emissions. So today we'll be focusing our presentation on these three sectors. I want to point out that our greenhouse gas inventory does not include emissions that were generated by personal consumption activities, and it also doesn't include the emissions that were generated by materials extracted outside of the county, such as building materials that were then brought in here. These emissions are in theory captured in the greenhouse gas inventories of other jurisdictions. By 2027, our emissions pie will need to shrink by 80% from 2005 levels to meet that 2027 interim goal. And that's just 8 years away. That's not a long time. And then our carbon neutrality goal is just 16 years away in 2035. And you see that blank spot on the slide. That was on purpose. There is no more emissions pie there. We should be at 0. So we're going to dive in and review our current and planned initiatives in each of the emissions sector. We'll be starting with residential buildings. And so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stan Edwards.
Thank you. So residential building and energy emissions are about 24% of the pie. We've had some activities in process related to energy efficiency activities and weatherization on low-income households. There are incentives that are offered by the utilities to do residential energy improvements. We have funding through the Green Bank, through the merger, Pepco Exelon merger, for both the Green Bank and for what we call Energy Coach, which is an activity that will involve outreach, extensive outreach to residences about things they can do to reduce energy use, to buy clean energy. We can talk more about that. One of the most important things about the residential sector is behavioral change. So there's a building component to it and a behavioral component to it, and both are equally important. So we'll make every effort to try to increase the efficiency of buildings, but then what people do within those buildings is another facet that we'll spend a lot of time working on in the future. And I can go into more details on any of those things when the time's right.
So next, we'll spend some time talking about the commercial buildings, which are 27% of emissions. And that also includes county facilities, which are a slice of the commercial sector. And we have a number of departments, maybe all of them at the table here, that have something to say about this sector. But I think we'll start with, or continue with Stan, and then move over to Diane.
Did you have a question? No? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Like in the residential sector, the building sector encompasses a lot of different things, the buildings themselves and activities within the buildings. So DPS will talk about building codes. We have an active benchmarking program right now. I know you are working on a draft bill that would modify the benchmarking law to expand it to other commercial buildings as well as look at multifamily properties. That's going to be an important step. And then using that benchmarking information to try to improve existing buildings, make them more energy efficient is obviously what you want. You don't want to just collect the data, you want to use that data to do something. So we have tools in the county already that we hopefully will expand. CPACE financing, which we're working on a build we discussed yesterday for new construction. We made some modifications last year that hopefully will allow it to be used more on existing buildings. And also the Green Bank has launched, their first product is a commercial product, and I can talk more about the status of that. They've discovered some things as they've moved forward with this that have changed from the time they developed the product to now related to the tax changes in the tax laws and depreciation. So who has money to do retrofits has changed, so they're changing their focus a little bit to try to adapt to the market. And we're also getting ready to send over the revisions to the green building tax credit that we discussed last year. That's currently being reviewed in the county executive's office, and we think that's a piece of the puzzle too. And I don't want to leave out the Empower utility incentives, which have been in place and continue to be in place, and that's an important tool for improving energy efficiency as well. I think just on the moving forward side, and I won't talk about the code part, but the benchmarking, changing benchmarking and having more buildings involved, but also what you do with the benchmarking data when you look at, say, an auditing requirement, a retro-commissioning requirement, and even as the district just did, pass a building energy performance standard that required certain buildings to achieve certain performance standards, is going to be an important facet of our approach moving forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Diane Schwartz-Jones. I'm the Director of the Department of Permitting Services. With me is Mark Nauman, who is our lead on everything green, just about. So what have we done? First of all, you may recognize this slide before. We, with the International Green Construction Code, the 2012 version that was adopted and took effect in December of 2017, adopted a ZEPI scale or score of 50, which means that basically that our expectation is that when buildings come to us for approval, that they will have an energy performance that is 50%, at least 50% better than the baseline for buildings in the year 2000. But as you can see, this is scored to get us down to 0. So we want to have our ZEPI score get better and better as we progress through the codes. And that's going to be an important part of how we move forward with the next iterations of the International Green Construction Code. We also have adopted the 2015 International Energy Conservation Codes. The state just recently, I would say in the past month, adopted the 2018 code cycle for the International Energy Conservation Code. As you know, I think Council, Mr. Hucker, I think you may have, as did the county executive, wrote letters of comment to the state about concerns that they were, in terms of what we see as some backward steps that the state took in some of its amendments to the IECC. The 2018 International Green Construction Code is also moving forward. We are doing our work right now. We intend to be moving forward with all of the I-codes, the 2018 I-code series, which would include the 2018 International Green Construction Code. And you can look forward to seeing that coming to the council within this year. It will be within this time frame. So with that, what does the International Green Construction Code do? It applies to new construction and to additions that exceed 5,000 square feet. It does not apply to single family, however. It does require that construction and demolition debris be diverted from the waste stream up to the amount of 50%. We look to, I already mentioned the enhanced energy performance. We look to the on-site heat island mitigation effect to be reduced by a minimum of 40%. And our code also provides for certain electives, project electives. There are things that you can do above the code. There are things that you could do that are above what the minimum requirements might be, whether it's for stormwater or whether it's for solar or whatever it might be, or the energy, any number of things. These are project electives. The smaller your project, the less you have to do. The bigger your project, the more you have to do. And then we do allow for an alternative compliance pathway for LEED Silver new construction for an energy pathway. So that's what the current state is. The 2018 IGCC, if you are interested in hearing a little bit about that, Mark Nauman can speak to you about it, but it is melding, whereas before the USGBC and the The ICC were a little bit apart. They worked together, but they were a little bit apart. There, in fact, as you may know, there was a white paper that USGBC had published that said adopt, and as does our climate protection plan, adopt the base codes for building construction, such as the International Green Construction Code, and have LEED be the motivator to drive for beyond code compliance. This is starting to come together a little bit more merged, and I think we're going to see it a little more merged as we move into the 2018 code. We're still doing work on that, though, so I want to be clear. If you had questions that are specific to that, Mr. Nama can certainly assist you.
With regards to our county facilities and lighting initiatives, I'll turn it over to David Dice and Al Roshdi.
Thank you. David Dice, Director of General Services. It was interesting listening to Diane talk about the International Green Construction Code. When the county was contemplating embracing that as its standard, one of the first questions that Diane asked me is what would be the impact to the county of doing this. So we looked at what we were doing because we've been building LEED buildings for some time and trying to get smart about our building design. We looked at it and said there's almost no impact because we're already doing a lot of these things. So I think that's something that Montgomery County should be proud of. At the council, when it passed the law requiring us to build all new buildings to a LEED Silver standard, is another significant achievement. Added to that is the fact that many of our new buildings are in fact LEED Gold, and the new Wheaton project that Al can talk about that DOT's constructing is LEED Platinum in its approach. But it's not just about new buildings. As Adriana mentioned, in order to achieve a very ambitious goal, we've got to be much more aggressive. And so we've been very much looking at general services at the portfolio of existing buildings. We have over 400 buildings, and retrofitting. Now, it's true that a motor that doesn't work at all consumes no energy, but we actually want our motors to work, and we want them to work efficiently. We are actually in the process of a condition and inventory assessment of county buildings to determine just those sort of things. We can have a motor that works efficiently and optimally versus one that doesn't is going to consume, the one that's malfunctioning is going to consume more energy. So we are currently surveying existing buildings. We have already implemented a number of renovations and upgrades in buildings among the existing portfolio, including lighting upgrades, building controls, water conservation, building envelope, and HVAC mechanical upgrades across the board. So the council, and my thanks to the County Executive Elrich, who understands the importance of a strong and healthy infrastructure and has supported our efforts to look at our existing buildings and begin those. We're funding our level of effort projects, which are often the source for these building renovations and upgrades. We are benchmarking our buildings so that we understand where we're starting from, and through smart metering can project on the growth and future performance of those buildings. As I mentioned, a number of energy projects are planned in the coming fiscal year. Over the next FY19 and 21 alone, we have 51 new energy projects. But it's not just about doing the building. And again, one of the things that Montgomery County should be proud of is the county government has always taken the role that if we're going to require these things of the private sector, the public sector needs to lead by example. And we are doing that in very significant ways. We've done almost all of our major buildings and energy performance contract upgrades and seeing definite improvements, lowering of energy consumption, and measuring those results has been very significant. The council office building is undergoing the final stages, at least we hope are the final stages of renovations and upgrades along those lines. We're looking at the executive office building as our next big candidate project, but we're doing a lot of bundling of smaller facilities so that our energy services companies, contractors, they're still attractive for them to come in and do these energy upgrades to our pools, our libraries, and all of the county buildings, actually. And it's not just about hardscaping buildings. It's also, as Adriana and others have mentioned, there's a culture change that needs to take place. We all need to get smarter and be more aware of what we're doing. So we've implemented work green employment engagement programs to engage major stakeholder departments, those that are the tenants in some of our major buildings, to raise consciousness on employee behavior, thermostats, lighting, and things of that sort. Some of the cooler projects you hear about at the Green conference that was hosted by DEP on Wednesday, net zero buildings relying a lot on sunlight and location and relying less on lights. We actually have a number of the buildings, the newer ones that we've designed to capture and benefit from the arc of the sun at different seasons, both in heating and cooling and shading. But it's also getting people accustomed to, you don't have to turn on the light if the sunlight lighting your office is sufficient. So we're working on those things as well, but that's an employee culture seed change that is our next effort out there. So we'll be issuing a new solicitation for energy performance contracting and applying the lessons learned over the last 5 years so that we can get even better and improved performance out of our buildings. Obviously, as you've heard, there's much more to be said, but a lot of the benefits, the low-hanging fruit that we can see is from lighting changes, and DOT's been doing a lot of work along those lines. So I'm going to turn this over to DOT Director Roshdi to talk about those.
Thank you, David. First of all, I have to say that we take pride to build the first LEED Platinum office building, largest county office building, and we thank all of our partners, DPS and DGS, to help us navigate through that process. In terms of our transportation infrastructure, we have completed replacement of all the county traffic signals with LED, and we are working with our friends in SHA to get them to replace the state signals to LED. We have upgraded or replaced 4,900 light fixtures in our parking garages, not only with LED, but also with occupancy sensors. So you probably have noticed that when you walk inside, as you go inside the garage, the lighting level changes, and then when there is no activity, it dims down. In terms of our street lights, we are well on our way to replace entire 26,000 county-owned streetlights and with LED, and we have been in communication with PEPCO, so the utility-owned streetlights is about 30,000 to be replaced with LED as well, so we can enjoy a low consumption and energy efficient and green lights.
Thank you, Al. I would like to take a moment to talk about this next slide, which shows the sources of greenhouse gas emissions for the combined building sector, so combining commercial and residential buildings together. It shows that 65% of the building sector's greenhouse gas emissions come from electricity, and 32% of the emissions come from natural gas. So next we'll be talking about distributed and renewable energy initiatives for both the private sector and county facilities to help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'd like to turn to Stan Edwards.
So based on that slide you just saw, one of the things I want to point out is that legislation at the state level is important for us to achieve our goals. There was a still ongoing discussion about renewable portfolio standard in the General Assembly, and that's going to make a big difference. That's an activity that will lift all our boats, if you will, to make them greener, and hopefully a study to get us to 100% at some point in the future will be part of that legislation if it's adopted. There were some good things coming out of the legislature this year. Community solar was expanded, the time frame and the number of participants was expanded, so that's a good thing. We have done a number of things in the county. The council has spearheaded some of those things to encourage and streamline the process for permitting of solar, changing some of the zoning requirements for solar, so that's important. One of the things we need to do, I think, though, is still take a full assessment of our policies, guidelines, zoning standards related to renewable energy and distributed renewable energy to make sure they mesh. I was at the post-Energy Summit reception at United Therapeutics, which is the county's first net zero building, on Wednesday, and learned that when they first wanted to install geo-exchange wells underneath the building, they discovered that they were not permitted to do that by state law. And they worked with the state to figure out why that was. And it turned out it was a relic of the state laws related to wells, all focused on water wells, drinking wells. So they said, well, this isn't a drinking well, can we change these policies? And the state agreed to work with them, and they worked that out. And so now you can put geo-exchange wells under the building. And Mr. Roshdi mentioned what we're doing in Wheaton, and a big feature of that building is this geo-exchange system in that building. So that's one of the efficiency features there. So this review of making sure all our requirements, our zoning, our permitting process, they're consistent, they don't overlap. All those procedures were put in place for good reason at one time or another, but we need to make sure they're updated and consistent now. So that'll be a big strategy going forward on the distributed renewables for us.
If I may, on the residential solar, we actually worked quite a bit with the solar industry, and we came up with a system where we created sort of a very simple refer-back type of a permit approach. And actually, these permits get issued within about three days approximately. They're very quickly issued for the residential solar, and it's been working really well. So.
Next, I'd like to ask Director David Dice to talk to us about the distributed and renewable energy initiatives taking place in our county facilities.
Once again, county can be proud of the fact that it is pursuing innovative approaches all the time. Director Roshdi mentioned that the Wheaton building is going to be a LEED Platinum. That's because of some of the innovations that are being incorporated, including geothermal. But that won't be the first geothermal facility we have in the county. We actually have a number of others, Mid-County Rec Center, White Oak Rec Center, and others where we've been employing geothermal as well as other environmentally sensitive factors into our building design. So when it comes to distributed renewable energy, the first bullet that you have on that slide is really a wonderful achievement. The microgrids that have been successfully implemented at Public Safety Headquarters and the County Correctional Facility are really astounding achievements, and the first of their kind in Maryland and among the earliest in the entire country. In fact, the Public Safety Headquarters is producing more energy on site than it uses. And a lot of that excess energy is then by credit through back into the grid, reducing the energy costs at other county facilities. It really is an astounding achievement. The Holiday Park Senior Center, the solar panels at that center, that is actually a building that operates at no cost because of all the electricity required at that facility is generated through those photovoltaic canopies. So that really is an amazing accomplishment. The Equipment Maintenance and Operations Center in Gaithersburg, from water capture and reuse through ozonation into the gray water system, it was so unique that we had to actually also meet with the state environmental officials to talk to them about how this was going to work, and they thought it was very innovative. We were awarded for that. We've got solar projects all over the place. We have installed solar-powered on-street parking that Al can talk about. We're going to be implementing in the transportation section. We'll learn more about the electric buses. Our next big solar array project, we hope to install at the Goody landfill. It's not Goody, but the Oaks landfill. The only thing that's limiting our capacity at the Oaks landfill is a state cap on the ability to generate power on site. But we're working on with our legislative team and with PEPCO, incidentally, who's been cooperative in this, to see if we can get that cap released and elevated so that we could generate in excess of 20 megawatts of electricity just at the Oaks landfill. Always looking for more opportunities for microgrids, not only just in the public sector, but incorporating, for instance, in areas like a Rockville Town Center or other town center environments where we can do public and private sector microgrids. Because, again, the ambition and the goal and objective of the legislation is not just about what county government does, but it's across the county. The more we can see more community solar, more public-private microgrid arrangements, I think, are very important. Combined heat and power is a great energy reducer from fossil fuels when we look at things like hospitals and other places that are heavy users in that respect. So we're looking at a lot of those criterias and working with PEPCO and other entities to try and encourage some things. A lot of this, and even the discussions we've had among county staff, is helping the private sector to understand what can be done and who can be partnered with, because oftentimes looking at this, it can be very daunting. If we didn't have the expertise on staff, it would be much more challenging. Well, the private sector doesn't always have that. So how can we partner with expertise and resource identification? And that's one of the areas that we're looking at engaging more to achieve the larger goal.
Let me,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to just talk a little bit about the parking meters. Of course, all of our parking meters, the parking lots has been solar powered. I don't know, some of you remember that we had a challenge of getting power to our bus shelters because it required electric companies to run power. Now we have 42 bus shelter that is completely powered by solar panels, not only feeding the lighting inside, but also our bus panel, which indicates the next bus and the information in there. And also, we have installed all the solar-powered school flashers throughout the county, which now we have connection online. We can adjust it based on the events that takes place, so we don't have to go to the site. On the parking lots and parking garages, because we have a number of those, a couple years ago, we worked very close with DGS to convert those and come up with a solar panel on top of those, but because of the difficulty in terms of the infrastructure and the structure to hold these panels, we were not successful to get any of these companies to be interested. But now we are working again and trying to get maybe building the a structure that holds the panel so we can get these companies to come in and install solar panels so we have on top of these facilities that we have outside. So.
And continuing on to transportation, which is 41% of emissions in the county. I want to point out two of the data points here on the slide. The first, which is as of 2017, there were over 800,000 vehicles registered in the county, and that is the largest number ever of vehicles. And also that in 2017, 65% of county residents drove alone to work. And that number has held fairly steady over the last 14 years or so, has gone down only slightly by 1 or 2 percentage points.
Okay, let me just cover a few things. First of all, we take pride in having an energy efficient bus fleet. They're all either clean diesel with low carbon footprint, or hybrid, or CNG. And actually, we are on our way with electric buses, and we are hoping that we can transform the entire fleet in future with electric bus. Number of services that we have come up with is Ride On Extra, which is a very efficient service that runs from Lake Forest to Medical with a very limited number of stops. We have programs such as Kids Ride Free. We want these kids, rather than be driven by parents, to take the bus and go to their activities. And by the way, I just got the good news, and I want to share with you, because over the past few years, we have seen continuous decline in ridership, not only in our ride-on, in the entire country, actually, ridership is coming down. And our numbers for the March, for the first time, we are increasing by 1%. So that is good news. I can also share with you that Ride On Extra from day one, it has increased in ridership all the way. So that's a very good program. Flash service on Route 29 will start in 2020, and we are very excited about that. I think we can bring choice riders and bring a lot of people who may not be driving bus right now. And then the other exciting program that we are working hard on, and we're going to be introducing it in June of this year, is Ride On Flex, which is on-demand bus with the zones. It's going to cover 3 metro stations, Rockville, Glenmont, and Wheaton, and people basically can get on this system by downloading the app, and it will be just a regular bus service. And then, of course, bus rapid transit projects that is ongoing. Right now, we are working hard on the 355 project, New Hampshire Avenue, North Bethesda Transitway, and Corridor City Transitway. These are the projects that is being studied. Implementation, of course, New Hampshire and North Bethesda is not yet under study, but it's being planned. New sidewalks and ADA ramps. Over the past few years, we have done, I would say, a substantial increase in the number of the sidewalks, closing the missing gaps and ADA ramps, bicycle and pedestrian safety initiative, and also bicycle protected bike lanes. We were very proud to be the first suburban jurisdiction in the country to introduce a protected bike lane in White Flint, and we are well on our way. And actually, we're going to be the first suburban jurisdiction with protected intersection in Silver Spring. So there are a number of activities that has a direct impact on climate, and we are working with the council on the next generation of the transit demand management, which hopefully will be we'll get through that. And we are working hard in encouraging employers to expand telework options for their employee. And we see that as a result of, I can tell you this, the Metro Safe Track work that happened, everybody was scratching their head, including ourselves, what are we going to do with all these people who are taking Metro at the time when it was shut down? And actually, if many people start teleworking, and after that, they continue to telework. So I think we learned quite a bit. I will just go on the next page and talk about the charging station, because a few years ago, we started electric charging station in public facilities. And I'm very excited to say that whenever I go to some of these facilities, I see those spots are taken. And cars being charged. We have 32 vehicle charging station. And when we started this, by the way, we only pass our electric cost, exactly what we pay to PEPCO. We are not charging the public for any surcharge or operating cost or equipment or anything other than that actual cost of the. Now I'm going to ask David to cover the county electric vehicle program.
Okay, thank you, Al. We do have an aggressive expansion underway in introducing electric vehicles. We've been pursuing alternatively fueled vehicles for some time. County executive is ambitious and advocating a changeover to electric vehicles, which we are embracing. In addition to that, the council has for some time been focused on the county fleet. Is it the right fleet? And we're actually looking at right sizing and right typing the fleet. In other words, if you have a vehicle that never leaves the Rockville core, why does it need to be a large fossil fuel consuming vehicle? Can it be smaller, following a smaller drive radius? So we're actually in the process of implementing that review now. But we also, as Al mentioned, installing the charging stations at county garages. We're also aggressively installing charging stations. Every new facility we build includes electric charging stations. We have 20 charging stations across our 12 most recently developed facilities, and that is standard. Regarding electric buses that are coming, the slide points out that we've purchased our first 14 electric buses. The first 4 are being delivered this October. The balance will be the year after that, and we're installing the charging infrastructure at the Brookville Depot for those buses, as well as talking with, looking at options both in public and private sector competition for installing solar canopies over the entire bus parking area in the Brookville Depot, and then focusing on battery storage so that we're not just pulling electricity right out of the panels, but storing it and being able to reuse that, and what we don't use to power the operations at the Brookville Depot can be accessed back into the grid. So we're pursuing a lot of those initiatives. Battery technology is changing all the time. We're also looking, in fact, at the use of once we have an ever-increasing fleet of electric buses, the battery that powers the bus is only, there's a point at which it can no longer power the bus, but still has plenty of capacity. So we can actually use that as part of our microgrid solution at our depots as well, with the excess energy that remains in the battery. Again, can't power the bus, but it's got plenty of storage left to power lights and other things. So we're pursuing a lot of those innovative approaches as we see a transition in the fleet from fossil fuel and even the hybrids to an all-electric fleet. I think that is something that we are going to see in the not-distant future.
Let me just mention a couple of things on the buses, because as David said, we were successful in securing 2 grants so far on the electric bus. And we are working on applying for 2 other grants, one for VW and the other one for another NOLO, which is no energy or low. But the key is our typical routes are about 200 to 225 mile a day. And the current technology is about 150 to 200, as David said. And that is really depend on how much load, if it's uphill or is it downhill. And now we are, as part of these grants that we are applying, we are asking for dollars, not only for the infrastructure, the electrical charging infrastructure, but also for consultant to look at our routes and see if we can maybe split the route so we can have the electric bus running, for that, maybe 100 miles and then come back, get charged, and then go out again. So there is so much is happening that we are working with DGS on these electric buses. And then hopefully the technology is advancing so rapidly right now that I hope that by next year, we will have buses that run 300 miles. Then in that case, I see no reason that we could not replace every single bus in our fleet with electric bus. That has been a goal of the county executive, and we're working hard to get to that list.
If I could just add something to this, because sometimes the critics of the electric vehicle technology say, well, that's fine, but you're getting your electricity generated from a fossil fuel burning facility. The county purchases all of its electricity from through renewable energy credits, investing in wind. 100% of the county's energy purchased through PEPCO, but is investing in wind energy. So I think that's a significant thing to mention.
We've been spending a lot of time over the last month thinking through the climate planning and coordination efforts and how we move forward faster. And I'd like to share with you where we are at this point. It's still a work in progress. But climate leadership meetings of the county departments that are here at this table have already started, and they'll be continuing on a monthly basis to help improve information sharing and coordination. And we are also working on plans for more public engagement, including climate advisory opportunities to take advantage of the wealth of knowledge that exists in this community on this topic. We want to build on previous climate planning efforts, and we need a roadmap of prioritized actions, which is something that we don't yet have. And we are currently in the process of identifying resources to prioritize our planning and implementation efforts. We're looking at what's the appropriate level and scope of technical analysis and long-range climate and resilience planning that we need, and still in the process of formulating that. And finally, there's a need to communicate what we are doing in a coherent way. And I'm glad to share that DEP is in the process of developing a climate website that should help on that front.
Adrienne, if I could just, one of the things that we're required to do as the party responsible for county government activities and sustainability, environmental awareness, we're responsible for producing a report each year, the Green Government Report. It's literally hot off the press. I just got the copies today. We have copies for you. The copies are being transmitted to the county council through the county executive this afternoon, but you get advanced copies. So this is also, obviously, we limit the number of hard copies because it's supposed to be a green report. So this will be available on the DGS website and links to other places. But I think you're going to be really overwhelmed by the amount of activities. This covers not just what we do, but DOT, DEP, DPS, HSS, what everybody's doing. And I think that you'll find it's got a lot of metrics in the back. One of the things that everyone's always asking about is what are the metrics, and this provides a lot of the details that you're interested in. So there you go.
I'd like to close by sharing 6 things that people can do at their individual level to make a difference on this issue. The first is to live car-free if you can. I know it's not always possible. Second, buy green energy for your home. Third, make your home more energy efficient. Fourth, walk and bike more, drive less, and use more public transportation. Fifth, eat more plants and less meat. And finally, replace your gas-powered car with an electric vehicle. And please encourage your friends and family to do the same. And also, I'd like to add that there are co-benefits to all of this, and that includes better health, better air quality, and reduced utility bills. So we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Obviously, there's a lot of great things happening, and that's appropriate to the urgency of the problem. So let me ask, you answered a lot of my questions. Let me ask a couple remaining ones I have, probably one for each of you, and then and see what is on the mind of my colleagues, and then we can hear from a couple of our advocates as well. I know this has been in discussion. Don't know if there's a decision made. Can you tell us whether an outside consultant will be hired by the county to produce new recommendations on the climate change efforts broadly?
So we're still
Prioritize
thinking through it, but I think the answer likely is going to be yes. A lot of this work is very technical, and likely we will need outside help on some very specific topics.
Right. That's good to hear. If you go forward, how are you thinking about the scope of work for the consultant?
So we're still formulating that right now, but we've been brainstorming 10 or more different potential topic areas that may have a need for working groups. That's a lot of working groups, and so I think to be successful, we're going to have to prioritize. And we're currently going through that prioritization process to see which 2 or 3 working groups with technical assistance will be launched, in the coming few months, and which we'll need to wait a little bit longer. So we should be ready, probably, I would say, within the next 6 weeks to publicly share, which ones we're going to be launching first.
Great, thank you. I've been speaking to Al and David for a while about the Ford electric buses. Can you tell us more specifically when they're starting on, will it be on Route 18?
It will be late August, September timeframe this year for the 4, and then the remaining 10 will be next year.
Yeah. Any more specificity on when next year?
Yes.
The delivery schedule on the buses runs about a 12-month cycle. So we're getting the 4 buses in this late summer, and we have our existing infrastructure exists to charge them, and then we are now working on expanding that so we can, because we need new additional infrastructure for the balance of the 10. But typical delivery cycling on the buses is 12 months.
Glad to hear you're going after the Volkswagen money. Have you been in touch with MCPS about this?
No, but I heard that they are also interested in this grant.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
They had not previously expressed interest. The county exec and I sent a letter over,
Yes,
I think
I
at the
know.
request of the Sierra Club. They've agreed to launch an ambitious pilot program involving 1 bus. I have encouraged them to expand that. We're going to have a meeting set up soon, so I think they'll be encouraged by your interest in this, and I know they had some questions about charging stations and logistics as you're dealing with, so
Actually, I can share.
you might be able to be helpful to them.
Yeah, I can share with you that our grant request is 9.3 million. 5.5 from VW, and then, of course, 3.8 million will be matching for the replacement of the bus.
Great.
So we are using the bus replacement to do that. But it's for 8 buses, 8 charging station, and the infrastructure, believe it or not, these charging station requires a substantial heavy up from the electric company, and then David also working with us and Pepco. We are in continuous conversation and meetings and discussion as to how we can do this, and they are very much on board with this. So, and then the other grant is actually for 6 additional buses. Of course, we may not get exactly what we are asking, but we are going out very aggressively after any possible grant for electric buses or any other activities, including sidewalks. You know that we were very successful in some of these grants to do sidewalks or bikeways, and we have a team that does nothing but look for grants, look for good money.
Good. Good thing to do. When Senator Van Hollen was here today, I asked him about working with you and urging State Highway to apply for build grant for Georgia Avenue
Yes.
in particular, which I think needs a push. We're all interested in there were dozens of recommendations in the climate mobilization report. We all want to go after the lowest hanging fruit. Diane, you mentioned a lot of acceleration of permitting. I'm glad to hear you're doing final inspections of solar panels at this point, residential, at 3 days?
We do, no. We issue our permits within 3 days.
Okay.
Our inspections are next day. So when the work is finished, then we do the inspection the next day whenever it's called for. One of the things that we had found, and we had to get over initially with what was happening with the sales on solar panels, I don't know if you recall with the various credits that were out there, these were being sold and marketed everywhere. We were getting all of these empty placeholder applications with no plans being uploaded, nothing.
Right.
And then the customers were being told, well, you know, it's with the Department of Permitting Services, when in fact we had nothing to review. It was just, and so we got that under control. We worked with the industry. So now you know, when the work is done, as soon as that inspection is called for, we are out there the next day. I would say 99% of our inspections, including for residential and commercial, are next day inspections. So,
I'm glad to hear that. I still hear complaints about it, but maybe it's the 1%. And I definitely heard the other problem had been addressed.
so I dare say, though, I don't know that the issue is the 1%, because really, we do next day inspections, and I may have understated it at 99%. We do next day inspections. There may be a breakdown in communication between a contractor and a homeowner about actually calling for an inspection, because if they don't call to ask for an inspection, we don't know that they need it.
Right.
So,
You're always very responsive. I'll continue to bring any questions
so
I have to you.
I appreciate that.
The other issue may be with the interconnection with the utility.
Right. You can't do much about that. Why are townhouses 3 stories above grade considered commercial and require a commercial solar permit?
So the townhouses that are considered to be commercial are 4-story townhouses. They are, it is the way that the codes are written. They require different types of considerations relative to fire suppression. I think that Mark could probably answer this question better, but 3 stories and below is residential.
Right.
And if you get to that 4th level, which is probably more the higher end townhouses, then that becomes, that is actually under the commercial codes. It's the way the codes are written, and it really does relate a lot to the nature of both, basically fire safety and other types of issues.
Right. I mean, I've certainly heard the point of view that given more moderate income residents end up in townhomes, it ends up being an equity issue, and so, but you're saying it would require a code revision to change?
It would require a local revision to the state codes and the nationally adopted codes. It is a nationally adopted standard.
Is that right? Okay. And then also, do your inspectors provide an inspection window like a lot of professional repair professionals or cable companies?
We generally do. We try to provide a
How wide is it?
2-hour, approximately 2-hour window. We also have our inspectors' information available. But, you know, one of the things that we are looking to in the future, I make no promises on the time for delivery, but one of the things that we're looking at is we've been going through a series of upgrades because we'd like to get to a point where we're able to, as an inspector leaves one site, to send out a text message or an email to the next site that they will be on their way.
That's terrific. Good. Okay. Hans? Devin? Sorry, looked like you had a
Yep,
question.
thanks. Appreciate the update, lots of different functions here. I wanted to reiterate the need for the consultant funding. My concern is assessing the cost benefit of new programs and how to figure out how to target our investments. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm to do more and to keep adding in new initiatives, but we just don't know, like, what's the best way to spend $100,000 or $1 million or $5 million? And a lot of this ultimately comes down to funding. So is that the intent of the consultant, Adriana, is to kind of come up with a way to evaluate that question?
Yes, that would be one of the things that we're potentially looking at having the consultant do, is looking at the cost benefit, what is the return on investment for, prioritizing certain actions in terms of what do we get out of greenhouse gas emissions reductions.
For example, I've proposed adding more buses to the fleet, buying 5 more electric buses. Truth be told, I'm not sure if that's the next best investment or if there's something else here that would be a higher priority. And I just think we need to know the answer to that question. I've heard a lot about, for example, teams that do the coaching for buildings to help them meet the objectives of benchmarking or to just generally improve the efficiency of their buildings. Is that a better investment? I think we really need to be able to answer those questions.
I agree. I think that analysis will help us with sequencing, figuring out what do we need to do immediately and what can wait until maybe a little bit later down the road.
So if you were to need additional funding, do you have funding to do the consultant, or do you need additional funding to do the consultant?
So I've been given the green light to look for funds, and obviously I got here after the FY20 budget process was already pretty much completed, but I have a knack for finding funds, under the mattress, under the rug, that sort of thing. So
I want to look at work, though. I recommend looking here at your office.
Under their mattress.
Yeah.
So,
I don't have a mattress anymore.
All right, yeah, exactly.
be working with the departments here at the table, starting with FY19. I know we're kind of at the tail end of 19, but don't want to lose any momentum, seeing what funds we can use this year, and also looking at for FY20, what funds we may be able to repurpose towards climate.
Okay, what's your timeline to get an answer on that?
So I think within the next 6 weeks, we're going to have a pretty good sense of what are the working groups or technical analysis that we want to prioritize for the coming year, and that will give us a sense of what the funding is that we need. So first figure out what we're going to do, and then figure out how much does it cost, and look for those funds.
Okay, well, try to answer that question within this budget window, and then if you're unable to fully fund it, then we can try to add funding at the council. But we would need to know before, we need to know pretty quick.
Before our process.
In about 3 weeks. So if you're unable to do that, then, that's going to cause quite a delay. It could add months, this window, if you can make it in this window, but if you can't, then we have to introduce a supplemental appropriation, and then that goes through processes, and then you got the August recess, and then you're looking at October before you've got that funding, rather than July.
Yes, we'll do our best.
And it is an emergency.
Yes, and one thing that I would add is that I think we're going to need funds every year for the foreseeable future, because this is going to be an iterative process. It's not going to be a one-time and done. So probably for the next 10 years on out, we will annually need funding for various things. But
No question about that. I think this is, to guide the funding.
Yes.
And investments that we could make. I mean, honestly, if we had this now, it would help guide our FY20 deliberations right now. It's unfortunate we don't have it now. That was the intent, was to have that. That's what the council called for last year. So we just really need this to be produced. So thank you. Please keep us in touch about your progress there. I do want to raise the question about solar production in the ag reserve, I think you've got to tackle that issue. You know, that's a challenging one, but producing our own clean energy is a very direct way to create clean energy. And there are different models out there. And of course, not all farmland is ag reserve. There's plenty of farmland in the county that's not in the ag reserve. But I think that's something that has just not really ever been, people haven't been willing to consider that. But I think we have to consider that. So we got to figure out a way. The other thing I want to say, I really think we need to have some kind of ongoing advisory group to kind of have a structure for the groups to participate in a way that is transparent. So I don't know what, well, that's what I think. I think we ought to have an advisory group for groups to participate. I know that there is an engagement process that you have, and that's terrific. But I think it'd be good to for us to kind of have a sense of who's in the mix here. And this is an ongoing effort. I mean, this is something that's going to grow and build. And I think this will be an area where you'll put a lot of energy and hopefully get a lot of results. But the question of how the public participates in that is really important. And I think we just all want to know what that is, what that approach is. So, I considered calling for a group last fall and decided to hold off to see how the new administration would kind of handle it. So, I think it's probably something we ought to do.
Yes, it's something we're still thinking through, and how do we make it a win-win process for everybody? I think that I've heard some frustration from advocates that in the past, people would participate in these panels or working groups and meet for a while, and then maybe nothing would come out of it, and they spend a lot of their time into it. And so I want to make sure that, it's a valuable experience for everybody.
Sure.
We have so much data already that was collected from the 2009 draft climate plan, as well as the 2018 climate mobilization report. And so I'd like to be able to leverage that work as well. But certainly want a process that's transparent and that allows for, lots of public engagement.
Okay, I had a few questions on the benchmarking, Bill. I think that probably goes to you, Stan. I know you've been working on this and working with COG and lots of progress being made. Can you just give me another quick summary of when are we going to start getting reports and
Right, so we're working on the data for 2017 right now. We're late on that data. We've been working on lots of different things, so we will get that data out. We also are working on a technical solution to help us in the future make sure that we're able to get data out more quickly, but more importantly, communicate more regularly and more consistently with building owners. This is also in anticipation of expanding the benchmarking law. We want to be ready. Right now, there's about 800 and something buildings that are subject to the law. A potential expansion could double or triple that number. And right now, we're kind of handling things with spreadsheets and Outlook, and that's not an effective way to communicate with people. So we're working on a system that is used in other jurisdictions to manage their benchmarking process. So we have provided some recommendations to the draft bill that we've seen, and we'll be discussing those with Mr. Hucker's office to try to, again, make sure we're targeting the right buildings. Multifamily is currently not in the law, and that's probably a good opportunity for us to explore. There's a question about the minimum size of buildings to report. I think the tendency is let's get all buildings into the reporting situation, but for some smaller buildings, the bang for your buck, if you will, may not be worth the effort. The energy use is relatively small in those buildings, and the amount of effort that you have to go to make them understand what the law is and how to benchmark it becomes extremely difficult. So we want to right size, I guess, the benchmarking program. And so we've made some recommendations about that. And I think most importantly, we want a strategy, a long-term strategy, not a 1 or 2 year strategy, but a long-term strategy about how do we look at auditing, retro-commissioning, a building energy performance standard. The district just passed some legislation related to building energy performance, and we want to do that. We want to do that in a smart way with stakeholders so we can understand, again, what are the right areas to target. Energy performance standard is not the same for every building, and you want to make sure you're focused on the right buildings. And then provide the tools for people. It's fine to have your data and know what your building energy efficiency is, but if you can't do anything about it, that, nobody wants that, particularly the building owner, who's at a disadvantage if they have a poor performing building but don't have any way to fix it. So we now, unlike when we adopted benchmarking previously, the original law, we now do have some tools available. So in addition to the utility incentives, we have commercial PACE, we'll have green bank offerings. So hopefully we'll be able to work with building owners to say, your score is maybe lower than you'd like it to be, and we have ways to help you get it up. So
And what's the staff that you have working on that now?
we have, I don't even want to say one person. We have half of a person working on it right now, I would say. We have a vacancy in our department. Lindsay Shaw, was our commercial benchmarking and PACE manager, among other things, was promoted, a well-deserved promotion. She's hiring right now to fill her position. So she's juggling a lot of balls. She's been leading the effort to get our green building incentives over here, which are currently in review with the county executive. So that's the reason for the delay in the current benchmarking data. But we are confident that when we get the system in place and are fully staffed again, that we'll be able to regularly produce the data.
Right.
Yeah.
You'll be able to produce the data, but going beyond that into more engagement with the building owners and so forth.
Yes. Well,
That would need more staff.
Well, that'll be a combined effort of county staff, of the Green Bank, for example. The utilities do outreach based on their Empower program. So that'll be part of our strategy development, I think. How are we, when we talk about auditing and retro-commissioning and building energy performance standard, what are the needs there to inform building owners about what is available to them? So right now, I mentioned the Energy Coach process we're working on. That's primarily focused on residential properties. But there's an opportunity to expand that to,
Right.
starting with small businesses who are the entities that are least equipped to deal with energy issues. They just don't have time to focus on it. But there are opportunities there to save energy. Most of the larger properties have energy managers because it is a big component of their operating cost. So they're better able to handle things like that. But
So when we come to budget, could we maybe hear from you with some more ideas about what additional supports we could add at the council to ensure that we're moving fast as fast as is possible?
I think we could provide some ideas, yes.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you, Evan.
Thank you. Really good conversation. Lots of good substantive questions, many of which I wanted to ask and have already been asked. No, that the nature of this, and again, it's a good conversation. So just picking up on some threads that I've heard in the last hour, Ms. Hochberg, you had started off by sharing details, or at least sharing a headline regarding a conversation or a meeting you had yesterday with Google.
Yes.
Can you expand a little bit upon that?
Sure. So they came here yesterday for an introductory meeting. Stan Edwards, as well as Director Adam Ortiz, were there as well, and they were sharing an overview of, I think they basically want the county to do business with them on a variety of things. They were talking about Google Cloud and various services they offer. But towards the end, they talked about some of their sustainability initiatives, including some things that they offer free of charge. And when they started talking about their greenhouse gas emissions inventory pilot that they have going on, my ears perked up. And it's called, I believe it's the Environmental Insights, it's EIE, Environmental Insights something. But right now, if you
could Google it.
You can Google it, yes. And if you go online, they have piloted with about 5 or 6 cities worldwide. You can see the results for Pittsburgh and Mountain View in California, as well as a couple of cities, I believe, in Australia. And they use data from their Google Maps, and they don't exactly explain how they compile the data. They say it's proprietary, but they focus on the transportation and the building sectors, and they estimate the greenhouse gas emissions for a given city or jurisdiction in those 2 sectors. And they also do something interesting around solar mapping, which by typing in your address, you can find the solar capacity for your roof.
Are these, I think I know the answer to this question, but are these data sets that we have access to currently? this type of information?
Well, we have, what we have currently is what the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments provides. And I'm curious to see, once we're able to get a hold of the Google data, how much does it match up, or, how different is it, so that we can look further to see, what's happening there.
Yeah, I'm glad your ears perked up, because mine did too when you mentioned it. Sounds interesting, yeah.
I think what they're able to do, they collect a lot of data. And with that data, they're able to calibrate some of their models and techniques that they have. So that allows them to be more precise than we might otherwise be able to be. And so if they can get those calibrations right, then some of their tools might be useful for us in the future. So I think we were intrigued by the opportunity there.
Yeah, I think that's the right word, intrigued. And so I'd love to learn more. If a second meeting is scheduled, please share that information with us and see how we can harness their power in a good way. So thank you on that. And I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Roshdi and talk about some of the transportation issues you mentioned. I'm glad that you said, that transit ridership is up. You said 1%, I think. Do you know why that might be? Is it because of increased interest in the express buses, or just general?
No, actually, I asked Dan what he thought. He said he doesn't know if it's the gas prices, because I don't see any hike in the gas prices. Usually, that has a direct impact. I have seen increase in our Ride-On Extra from beginning that we put it into operation. I do project a good increase in ridership once the flash service goes into effect next May, because that's supposed to be carrying a lot of people. So I couldn't tell you exactly, but at least we have seen a continuous drop. Of course, our reduction in ridership has been much less than the WMATA or the national average, fortunately. But as the indication that it's on the rise, then it's a good news, and we will be monitoring, because we do want to provide a service. I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly what the reason is.
Could you share that information? Because
absolutely.
I'm curious to know if it's system-wide or if it's particular routes, and how far deeper we need to
Yeah, we're going to dig
analyze
into that a little bit further to see if it's specific corridors that has caused this increase, or is it because the number of holidays and all kinds of things really feed into the ridership. But when we compare last March with this March, we do see for the first time an increase of 1%, and that was great.
Great, thank you. I look forward to seeing that. Last thing I'll just say is within the presentation, the only aspect that I think is missing is the waste, the recycling, the composting. But I know that we had a briefing on that recently. But in its totality, it's an important part of this conversation. So for those who are here or monitoring this, if you want to watch our hearing from last week, you will get a deep dive into that issue, but it's an important to note. So, thank you.
Thank you. One, as we're pointing out missing pieces, we can't do everything today, but another aspect of course of climate change that we haven't talked about is climate resiliency, climate adaptation. We've focused all on carbon reduction, but Maryland's the third most vulnerable state. It was probably 10 years ago, I participated in an all-day conference led by Governor O'Malley on what we're doing to prepare for the effects of climate change, and I think a lot of those efforts have sort of slowed down at the state level, unfortunately. And as hard as we work here, we're not going to stop it by ourselves. So, yeah, I do want you to try to keep your eye on that ball as well, because we have a lot more flooding, rising asthma rates, other things like that really affect quality of life and insurance premiums and everything else in Montgomery County.
Yes, I agree. And climate adaptation, climate resiliency is one of the working groups that we're considering for launching sooner rather than later. And also, I'm going to be having an introductory meeting with the Office of Emergency Management next week, and I understand that they've been doing some work in this area, so it'd be great to, find out.
I've asked for them to be added to the working group months ago, yeah. So, and we have great volunteer experts in Montgomery County on this topic.
I was going to say that we also are working on culvert and bridges.
Uh-huh.
As we can see the changes in the amount of water that goes through some of these. And actually, some of the infrastructure, you know, it's aged and old, and so we are actively looking in that area and working on it.
Right.
And then in
Flooding
terms of
damage is taking a
recycling,
toll
as
on
you
our
said,
CIP.
one of our pride is all the recyclings that we've done. Maybe we need to advertise more. For example, on our asphalt, 1/3 of our asphalt is recycled material that is milled on the ground. We do our all recycling with the leafing, number of other activities that we do. And then in Greenfest, we actually display all the recycling and environmentally sensitive things that we do in transportation.
Right, April 28th?
I was going to say, that's a good lead in there.
If I may,
We can
on
plug
resilience.
Montgomery County Green Fest, yeah, on the 28th, 11 to 4 at Brookside Gardens, the biggest environmental festival in the county. We're
a great
partnering with Montgomery Parks this year. They have an annual event. We're putting the two together, so it's going to be a Lollapalooza. or
Will we have any
Greenapalooza,
electric
I guess.
buses to show?
We will not have electric bus, but we will have a few other things.
Yes, okay.
We will have electric cars.
Diane's been trying to get in here,
I was
gentlemen.
on resiliency, I couldn't stop that bus. So, on resiliency, building codes are a very big part of
Yes.
resiliency. And as it relates to that, the building codes look at a number of things. There are a number of things that are area-specific as well, such as wind bracing and things of that nature that make us have the ability to withstand dramatic events. And so I think, as you know, the committee, and I don't know if all the committee members know, but the building code effectiveness scale is something that looks at how you are performing and how your codes are applied for specifically the issue of resiliency. And our ISO rating improved to a 3, which puts us in the top insurance credit category for the country. And there are only 2% of jurisdictions in the country that actually achieve that most favorable insurance credit rating. So it's relevant to what you were just talking about.
Great, thank you. Well, this is a terrific briefing. This being Montgomery County, we have terrific advocates working with us as well and providing some of our eyes and ears on the ground. So I wanted to, if you could free up a couple microphones, I wanted to call up Michael from the Sierra Club and Rick from 350 to give us a little response. See if you have any additional suggestions for things we should be keeping in mind. You all, please, at least a few of you should stay. Michael, take it away. You just got to press the button. Yeah, we want to wrap up soon, but I don't want to rush you. Sorry. Now that you're here, yes,
Limited time.
it's all David's fault.
I'm Michael Friedman from Sierra Club, and thank you for inviting us to present. What I wanted to do was to focus on one segment of what has been discussed, which is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, which is buildings, and I wanted to focus on commercial and multifamily buildings. Because we know that it's the places we work and live in and go to school in and shop in that are contributing the majority of emissions. So we have, there's one tool that we've talked about, benchmarking, which is quite foundational. You have to know how a building operates relative to other buildings for to have some idea, just some incentive that you need to improve the building. And the data that is available from other jurisdictions, not this one yet, but that is available from other jurisdictions, shows that there is a potentially large improvement that you can make with that kind of information. In Seattle, they found that if you could move those scoring in the lowest quartile up to the highest quartile, they would improve their energy use by nearly 50%. I mean, reduce their energy use by nearly 50%. And New York City had similar figures. And we need the information to come out in a timely way, because what the law requires and the whole theory behind benchmarking is that the building owner managers, as well as the tenants and the contractors, know about how a building is operating so that they will, because of their choice of where they want to live or business opportunities, will add additional incentive to changing the efficiency of the building. So while benchmarking is critical to making improvements in this area, it isn't actually sufficient to lead to the energy improvements. Several consultants and nonprofit leaders have said that what they find sometimes is that the building owner managers think of this as a government requirement. They use the software, they come up with a score, they submit the information, and then they move on to what is pressing and that they need to deal with. And so instead of it being a first step, it's a final step. And there's a related problem with commercial pace, which is also a very important tool for making progress here. And now the county has, as of the fall, very good legislation addressing existing buildings. But several companies at a recent Maryland Energy Summit said that what they found is building owners and managers would hear, look, you don't have to put any money down, and you'll start saving from month one because your energy savings will exceed your load payments. But their response was, well, that's too good to be true, I don't trust it. So it's critical that we have the legislative framework, the benchmarking, the commercial pace, but there needs to be some kind of framework that that catalyzes the improvements, that changes the culture for building owners and managers, that provides some resource that they trust and that has the technical expertise to see what to do next. And that's something that New York City has. There's various cities that have tried things out. New York City has something called a retrofit accelerator, where they have a staff of people that identify based on benchmarking which are the most problematic buildings and go after them and hold their hands and tell them, and this is what you can do and this is how you can finance it. And Boulder has something similar. This is a city of 100,000 people, and they have 6 people doing this, which they pay for out of their energy tax. And then there's other cities that have a kind of a public-private kind of operation where they have a peer network where building owner managers help each other with some kind of assistance from the public sector. And Pittsburgh is a noteworthy case where they have made a lot of progress using that. In the case of multifamily buildings, especially affordable multifamily buildings, it's especially helpful to have some kind of resource to help the buildings, because as was previously said, there's often no energy manager, they're spread thin. And so we've heard that the Green Bank is doing a pilot project to see what can happen when you have someone assisting the building in deciding what needs to be done and how to finance it, and that's great. But our understanding is that the pilot project is possibly one building, which may not be enough of a pilot to really get an idea of how that can work. So just to summarize, it's important to have the good foundation, but in order for it to really maximize its effects, there needs to be the resources, both to allow the benchmarking data to come out in a timely way and to assist the building owners and managers to make the progress. And I have an additional comment, which is that since we've heard about the executive department being interested in working groups, which sounds like an excellent idea, and those groups, like a group that was focused on buildings, could generate elements of a plan or recommendations on what priorities would be to move forward. But the council has to play an important role, and this committee has to play an important role. There has to be a dance between the executive department and those working groups and this group, where this group sets up deadlines and asks for reports and gets responses, and then follows through to see what resources are needed and provides those resources to make sure those things happen. So I wanted to say that because this process is just beginning, we don't, and unfortunately it's happening at the time when the budget is being decided, we don't know fully what resources, the specifics of what resources are needed. But even in the absence of knowing precisely, it will be important, given the emergency, to put in the resources so that we don't have to wait another budget cycle, wait until it, delay the implementation of whatever recommendations come forward.
Right. Message delivered. Okay.
Thank you.
Rick? Anything to add?
Yes. Thank you for this opportunity. I agree that with everything people have said in terms of this being a really excellent conversation. I guess the one point, these questions were formulated by Jeff Weisner, who had to leave early, so I'll do my best to kind of represent them. But I want to piggyback on something Michael said, sort of about the communication aspect of this and the emergency aspect of this, the mobilization aspect of this. And, you know, we have an emergency climate resolution. The county has procedures, I assume, I haven't researched this, for things like public health emergencies. If there was a malaria epidemic, a cholera epidemic, there would be procedures that would go into effect. And citizens would be advised, cajoled, handheld, whatever they needed to do, whatever the government needed to do to get them to take precautions to protect themselves and their fellow citizens. And we're in the same kind of situation now. So kind of, I believe, and I think all of us that care about this and recognize it as an emergency, think that we need to move forward using that kind of framework for communication. And, you know, of course, there's issues about internal communication within the county, with the executive and the council and the different departments, and developing procedures so everybody's moving forward, you know, with common purpose, common understanding of what we're doing, which of course includes us as grassroots people as well. So, you know, I think that initiatives to use those approaches for the emergency mobilization of the government, the private sector, as well as citizens, those have to be really carefully thought out and aggressively pursued. Let's see. I mean, I was very interested to hear the information about Google and their potential ability to gather data. But certainly that is a big issue that we see in the grassroots community, that, you know, the COG data, it doesn't seem like an adequate data collection system, you know, in terms of what we need to do, what the data we need to have, how often we need to have it, the detail that we need to have within it. So I would hope that, you know, the Google thing may come to fruition, but, you know, there needs to be a plan for that. If there's funding that needs to you know, be put in place to make sure the data collection is robust and frequent enough, and I mean, this whole effort is dependent on getting that data and getting it regularly and getting it accurately. So.
Okay. Well, a couple of us work closely with COG, so we'll definitely follow up with them on the rapidity of the turnover.
And I'll, just on a personal note, I mean, I have some discomfort with, you know, a private organization that has a proprietary hold on the technology to collect the data. You know, it just seems like you know, there's been problems with proprietary, you know, election voting systems, you know, similar kind of things. I mean, I think that technology for data collection needs to be transparent enough to us as citizens and government officials so that we can be confident, you know, about it, obviously.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all for putting in the time, for all your hard work on this, and we're going to stay in close touch.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.